Welcome to a special edition of the eDuck podcast. I'm Robby Boydstun here with Steve Summers, publisher of eDuck.com, and we're here at the opening on the Nike campus in Beaverton. Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Actually, we're sitting in the media room inside the Tiger Woods building in the air conditioning, although it's a great day today. I'm taking Eric Scopel's place today because I'm his summer replacement for
the day.
And so it's my one great chance to make it big in iPod, so I hope I don't blow it.
Oh, no. Well, we've had you on the show before, and we love having you, so, and you're always welcome. But let's kind of dive in. We've already gone through 2 days of the opening, and now we're on day 3, which of course means big 7-on-7 tournaments, and also the lineman challenge. A lot of Oregon fans are going to focus more on the 7-on-7s. So with that in mind, obviously some kind of shocking developments in terms of after coming out last night with Team Apocalypse, who have Oregon targets, Royce Freeman, Joe Mixon, and Buda Baker on it, having such a big day yesterday, and now they're out 2 games. First 2 games today, they're out, and that was a big development. I'm curious on your thoughts about that. I thought, to me personally, it was a shock.
I think the big thing to remember in all this is that what we're watching are good high school players. Players are going to go into their senior year of high school. They have been doing this now for 3 days. It's probably a ramp up in terms of, if you were doing daily doubles, I mean, these guys have been pushing it hard. In fact, I thought at one point it would be interesting watching out on 7-on-7 if they would up tempo to like what Oregon does and count the number of reps that they take, how quickly players would start wilting and giving them a chance. The first day, Monday, was really hot. Second day was not so bad. Today actually is a very nice day.
It's almost perfect.
But really what happens, I mean, you're talking about young guys, and even though they're in great shape, it's starting to wear on them, and in the conditioning, they're probably feeling it. And I don't know how much. They probably don't have a nutritionist with them, and they don't have someone like Jim Radcliffe, who's out there leading on their condition, making sure they're conditioning. So what we're seeing is just the raw talent of the players, and day 3, they've been exerting a lot of energy, and it's starting to catch up with them.
Yeah, and I thought that, going out there today, from my point of view, watching Team Apocalypse showing up here this morning, yesterday, their first game was against Morgan Mahalick's team, Field General's team. Of course, Mahalick, a Elite 11 quarterback and Oregon verbal commit, who's had a good weekend, but he had a bit of a rough day yesterday, and even talked to his dad a little bit about that earlier, and it seems like he's had a nice bounce back day today, but yesterday with Team Apocalypse, they looked so dominant. They had, even looking at the roster beforehand, and I talked about this with Eric, they just looked like the most stacked roster. They had so much speed, so much talent there, especially West Coast talent, which is something that we get to follow a little bit more closely. And so you got the sense that this is going to be the team to beat. And for a period of time they were. Field Generals had a rough time doing, in their secondary play. They had Adoree Jackson and Darius Pickett back there. They looked a little out of place, a little out of sync, and Buda Baker made them pay for it offensively. Baker, again, was a bit of a factor on offense today. In fact, from my position during that first game, he was their only factor. Joe Mixon had a couple. He actually had a spectacular leaping catch, which showed off not only his athletic ability but his strength. He's a pretty big guy for where he's at, and he's very quick. But Baker was really kind of the only thing they could get going offensively. That being said, they almost did make a comeback at the end, but really Field Generals kind of turned everything around. It's been almost kind of a 180 from day 2. And I think, like you said, fatigue might be playing a part into that. But luckily, this is a day where this isn't going to drain on the guys too much. There's not a ton of the weather's not as unbearable, and it's going to be fun seeing this final. Right now, Team Landsharks, which has Arian Springs, new Oregon commit, who, if you listen to the podcast yesterday, you heard an interview with him, and then it has Mitrell McGraw, who a lot of fans are hoping will be a Duck soon, and that could come as soon as August. They're both back there in that secondary. Also, Racing Thomas, who's a running back from in the southeast that has Oregon still in consideration. He's a kid that you can keep your eye on a little bit. Um, they're playing right now. They're playing Team Alpha Pro for a spot to play field generals in that final. And for 7-on-7, that's a big deal. This is about as big as it gets here at this camp. And just you're seeing a lot of big crop of Oregon talent and Oregon targets in there, and that's got to be exciting for a lot of fans and a lot of eDuck fans as well. On the website, it's got to be exciting for them to see.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, I mean, if we were to compare this to, say, fall camp for the Ducks, and this would be, they would still be in shells. And so when you see the first 2 to 3 days in shells where they're wearing, they're not in pads, and sometimes they weren't wearing helmets. Although in the big men today were wearing pads and helmets. It's just when you hit about day 3 and day 4. Particularly when in fall camp, when they put the pads on first day, that's when you start seeing things shake out as, what kind of shape are these guys in, and so these guys out here today at the opening, they're really, this is probably the first time that they've really come together where they've had talent that's going to be equal to them. In other words, you get some guy who's a 5-star and he's the star of his team. He's the best player on his team, on his high school team. He might see a couple guys maybe in his conference league might be a good player, but he won't see similar talent to him until he's in an all-star game. Now, amp that all up when he takes, he steps foot on a college campus, and he goes to a team, say to Oregon. We're going to go there, and there's all kinds of guys that were here. There's all kinds of guys that have been in the U.S. Army All-American game. Several of these guys, many of these guys are going to end up there too.
Yeah, they'll be in some game, either All-American or the Under Armour game or anything like that. Yeah.
But they still are high school players, and when they get into college and they get into the training routine, they get into the training table, their hardest hit that they're going to experience is the first contact in fall camp when they're going to run into some walk-ons trying to earn a scholarship, and that's going to be the hardest hit that they'll ever experience, that they've experienced up to that point. So it's not so surprising that a team can do well and then suddenly hit a road bump. It's some adversity for them. They'll be able to recover from that and move forward and learn from what they picked up here, and should take that through their senior year of high school.
Right, and building on that, just that's what the coaches are out here for too. This is why when you're invited to one of these camps, you're not coming out here just because you're the best player, but you're coming out here to even further push yourself, further test yourself against the top athletes in the country. And that's been kind of the fun thing, asking these guys about what they think about matching up with these guys and how they feel, because this is kind of a true test. For some guys, Springs even mentioned that. He played in the Dallas NFTC. He participated in that camp, and he said it was similar in terms of talent because there's probably a bigger crop of talent down there in Texas. But for a lot of these guys, especially West Coast kids, where Oakland has a decent amount of talent when they do the NFTC up there, but you go up to Oregon. Oregon has some talent up there. There's not a ton of it's not a ton of 5-star guys though. Right. It's not like it is out here. So if you're in Oregon, the premier camp in Oregon is here. This is the premier camp nationally, and you're here to prove yourself. And you've got kids coming in from, every big spot in the country. You're seeing a lot of kids up close that you haven't been able to analyze in person. A lot of kids, some kids from the Southeast who got Oregon offers way back early. Now, Oregon may be out of contention, but these are kids you're finally seeing up close. I saw Kane Dobb, who's a kid out of Florida, I believe the Jacksonville area, and just seeing him up close in person, he looks like a kid. I don't think he's going to be coming out west of Oregon, but he's a kid that whatever team he lands on, he's going to be a force of nature. Just looking at not only his skill set and the way he plays, the high intensity he plays, but also just his physical presence. And a lot of these kids, when you see them up close, their physical presence is just incredible. And you talk all the time about what is always keep an eye out for the guy who looks like an Oregon athlete. And there's a lot of kids out here that look like they could be Oregon athletes.
Well, that's sort of when you've got a BCS team that you're following, you're covering on a regular basis, and you see their players, and you see the kind of guys that they would like to bring in, the length and the speed, and so that's sort of a eyeball test if they match that, and then move to the next point, because a lot of players, as long as they've got those basic physical tools, great coaching staff's going to coach them up on the football part. At least they like to think of themselves that way, and that that what they lack in football knowledge, that's what the coach is going to do. He's going to teach them and train him up how to do that.
Now, I'm going to ask you just a couple questions because I'm curious, like your thoughts on a few of these prospects out here. Obviously, we've talked about Baker a lot. Even today, we have some news on the site. So please go out, check out eDuck. We've got a huge roundup of everything that's gone on from the top stories from Scouts, top stories from eDuck. So be sure to check that. But just guys like the Northwest prospects that aren't committed to Oregon, and not even Northwest, but even West prospects. The guys like McGraw, the guys like even Springs, who just committed, and then the Bakers, the Freemans, the Mixons. I'm curious, from your standpoint, just what you think about some of these kids, and just what your opinion is of them fitting in as an Oregon type athlete.
Well, Caleb McGraw from Fife, Washington. The first thing I noticed that, because it was another warm day at Autzen Stadium at the NFTC camp a couple of weeks ago. And he had his shirt off, and I said, "Oh man, there's Colt Lyerla." Colt Lyerla, for those folks that may not know, is the starting tight end at Oregon. Was a 5-star.
Out of Hillsboro.
Was a U.S. Army All-American. And a lot of folks are thinking that, gee, after his junior year, he might be playing on Sundays instead of Saturday. But Caleb McGraw is a
McGarry.
I'm sorry, McGarry. He is a physical specimen, and I understand he's out playing basketball. So.
Yeah, doing AAU this summer.
Yeah, so he's playing some basketball and showing that he's a pretty good athlete. So, but again, we talked about, does he look like a player that you would see that would be practicing the Oregon Ducks? Yeah, he sure does. So I think that he's in high demand. Obviously, he's a 4-star player, so he's an obvious demand. There's going to be a lot of folks looking at him, particularly when they catch sight of him. The physical tools. This guy's got what they can't teach. So.
Yeah, and I see some of those similar qualities in a guy like McGraw, and a guy who's a 3-star prospect.
Right.
But if you look at him, he's got over 30 offers. He's got over 3 dozen offers, I think, right now.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit deceiving when you look at, because you'll see some guys who have 4 stars that don't have that amount of offers.
Yeah.
And so, you see a guy who's like McGraw, who very well could move up those rankings, especially coming into his senior season, which by then he might even have his commitment out of the way. But I see those type of, watching him at 7-on-7s and seeing his aggressive ability, seeing the same thing with Baker. Baker made an incredible play today, where they were almost, it was a dagger touchdown. The field generals was marching down the field, deep ball going down the field, sure touchdown. Baker comes all the way across the field because the other corner got burned, comes and taps the ball away. And it's just, you see that speed, and the knock on him has always been size. But with all of those other abilities, he makes up for that lack of size. I think where he's at on the field.
Weren't we talking with Eric yesterday, and we sort of mentioned that there's a player on the Oregon roster named Anthony Thomas that isn't particularly Thomas.
I think I've heard of him.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty good.
Yeah.
He's a pretty good football player.
And he's also similar in that, the slot wide receiver position, and Baker was playing a lot of that out here this week and doing quite well.
Baker, who's been recruited as a defensive back here at the opening until I guess it was Was it today was the first time that he was out playing defensive back, or was he?
He was playing, I think, a little yesterday, but yeah, today was really primarily the first time he was kind of going back and forth. And and again, the first day he was doing a lot when they were doing the Spark training. It was a lot of him playing slot wide receiver because the coaches wanted to see what he could do.
Yeah.
And again, he's showing that he can do it. Offense, defense. And if you've seen his tapes, because they don't do a ton. They don't really do it out here. But if you see him, he's a threat on special teams as a return man. And you're right. The first name that pops up for Oregon fans would probably be DeAnthony Thomas in a comparison, especially with how fast he is.
Well, I and because we're talking on an Oregon website, let's talk a little bit about the Oregon football team. I mean, going into fall camp, we think that the Ducks are pretty deep into all the positions. How far that depth goes in. I've heard some chatter about the defensive back. I mean, when you've got two guys who could be potentially leaving after their junior year to go off to the NFL, and that being Evoik Bray Olumu, who's the first team All Pac-10, Terrence Mitchell, he is another guy that is
aggressive,
hard hitter,
always after the ball. He's always on the ball.
Plus, so there's a lot of depth there, but this recruiting class is probably going to need to supplement some losses. So the Ducks could be losing a fair amount of defensive secondary, so they want to replenish that. And so right now they have one junior college player who's transferred as a commitment. They picked up
Dominic Harrison
yesterday, so I wouldn't be surprised in picking up 2 or 3 more.
Right,
at least.
And we talked about the kind of the dilemma, I guess, that Oregon is supposedly facing, the fact that Jonathan Lockett, who's now a UW verbal commit, who was very high on Oregon. In fact, Fox Sports Next Greg Biggins kept pretty regular tabs on him, updating people on the eDuck website about how much of an interest Lockett had in Oregon, and then all of a sudden he goes to Washington, and rumor is that Oregon said we're locked up. We have our targets at cornerback, and we might not have room. That's got to be a great problem, right? I can't.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, all this sort of happened right after the verdict came down on the NCAA sanctions, and so the Ducks did lose one scholarship for this upcoming recruiting year, and they'll only be able to take 24 players instead of 25.
Right.
So perhaps, maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. I guess that'll play out. I know in my reporting in the past, certainly having a kid change his mind at the last minute. I remember a few years ago, there was a defensive tackle back east that was just surefire, and a guy who was covering the story actually had the story written, and all he had to do was just press the the save button, and it would have been published. And the kid gets out on national TV, and he has the hats there, and are all expected to see what the Oregon hat, and puts on Florida State's hat. You just never know. I mean, all kinds of crazy things can happen. I mean,
they're 17-year-old kids. They change their mind every 10 seconds.
Just wait till National Letter of Intent Day, and you just, I mean, I recall years ago where a kid that the Ducks recruited sent 2 letters of intent out, one to one school and one to the Ducks, and they had to sort that out. So, I mean, any number of things can happen with these guys.
Well, and that's what makes recruiting so exciting, and maybe, and we'll see this heading forward. But when we talked to Henry Mondu the other day, and we were talking about where the Ducks liked him, because he came out here as a tight end. He said the best way I'm going to get out, or the best option for me to make it to the opening, is to go out as a tight end. So he's been playing that a lot. Oregon likes him on defense. His primary recruiters are on the defensive side. Alioti, Aiken. He's even talking to Pelham a little bit. Probably a little too big for the linebacker position, but maybe it's just something, Pelham could provide some tips or position or something. So, but my question is that he mentioned that Oregon should have plenty of room to recruit DEs as well, defensive ends as well.
Yeah.
I think he exaggerated a little bit on the numbers that he told us, but it sounds like that's going to be another focus heading into the future. And considering they haven't done a ton of work thus far that we know of, you got to expect that that's going to pick up here heading into the football season, especially once they start getting into fall camp here, which it's coming up pretty quick, actually.
Well, Henry looks to me like a kid that could bulk up and could be not only play defensive end, who knows down the road how big he can get if he is a player that could end up, in the interior on the defensive line. Remains to be seen, of course, but these factors all. With him, he had some success out here as a tight end. So we'll see what happens on his recruitment.
Yeah, and I'm curious and just want to ask you, I haven't gotten the impression that there's really any, there's not going to be a lot of flipping, at least with the 7 guys that are on the Oregon verbal commit roster right now. Even talking to Springs yesterday, you get the feeling that Texas is not going to let up on him. Him being in Texas, they don't like it. They're very much like Oregon fans, probably a little bit more obsessive about the fact that they do not want to lose top in-state prospects. You remember that, with Oregon State and losing the Rogers brothers who came from Texas, and that was a big deal. I remember even back when that happened. So we know Texas is going to be on Springs, but even talking to him yesterday, he even said it wasn't that hard of a decision for me. I always knew I wanted to go to Oregon. It was just, I just had to make sure. Do you foresee any reason, especially like we talked about, they're 17-year-old kids, things change given the time we saw Alex Redmond last year, who seemed like he was going to be solid with Oregon, and all of a sudden flipped, and he was a UCLA Bruin. As of right now, do you see anything that could
really
come into play?
Those are also some of the road bumps that I think happen in recruiting. A guy will commit early, and down the road is, who knows what caused it. He falls in love with some young lady, and she's going to go to a different college, and that's the college I want to go to, and or just life changes, and he meets another recruiter. I think in recruiting really comes down to who the young man thinks in terms of, it's about the coaches. And it's, you can talk about facilities, you can talk about location, you can talk about tradition, you can talk about all these things, and that's all great and good. But I think the biggest factor for these kids is who the coach he's going to spend the next 4 or 5 years is, and the other coaches along with that. But his primary position coach, that's the guy he's going to spend the most time with, and that it's about who he feels most comfortable with, who's going to deliver him to the next place he wants to go, whether that's to the NFL or some further step in his life. But I think that's always what it is with these recruits. And so, if they don't have a real solid feel for the coach that's recruiting them, or they meet somebody else that they like better, then they move on.
All right. Well, okay. I think we're about 25 minutes in here. I think that's actually kind of a good stopping point. Wrap up our time here at the opening.
For a rookie replacement like me, 25 minutes is great. Eric, thank you for the chance to headline and make my debut on eDuck podcast.
Well, it won't be the last time we have you on, that's for sure, Steve. So thank you very much for your insight. We're going to let Heavy Heaters take you home, and that will be your wrap-up from the opening here on the Nike campus in Beaverton, Oregon. Again, be sure to check scout.com and eDuck.com for everything. We've got everything covered from the opening, and this is going to be kind of the big go-home before we hit the summer lull a little bit. So for Steve Summers, I'm Robby Boydstun, and this has been the eDuck Podcast.